Welcome to Words of Prey, which is a Pipeline Artists original podcast. You can reach us at podcasts, plural, at pipelineartist.com and find us at pipelineartist.com/listen. You are the author of 5 novels, the short story collection Takeout. You've also written with James Patterson and The Warehouse, which is your last book, but Paradox Hotel is coming out in
February 2nd, 2022, which is kind of nice.
It's lovely, and it's an amazing cover, and it's an amazing book. The cover, which was just debuted today. God knows when this will actually air.
Yep.
But this was timely as of the time I've said this.
Yeah, and oh God, what a nice cover that was. Like they really
they did a great job. So actually one of the awesome things about your journey, Rob, is that you've not only, and this sounds terrible the way I'm going to phrase it, so forgive me, but you've gone through multiple agents, multiple publishers, and you've actually had an interesting journey because you've worked at publishing imprints / bookstores, as well as actually being an author yourself before you got, I'll do like air quotes, your big break with The Warehouse and going to a big 5. So if you can tell me a little bit about how you started and if it was intentional or how you like gamed the system to get where you are.
Well, it's funny. I always knew that I wanted to write books, but I got a degree in journalism, and I got into journalism because I thought, well, I want to make money, and that's probably where the money is. So, if you hear that and you think like, I'm not going to listen to another word this guy says, like, I would totally understand that. But, I worked in journalism for a few years. I worked in government doing press for a few years. And, they were both really demanding jobs, and I really burnt out in like a big way, and ended up taking a job running mysteriousspress.com out of the Mysterious Bookshop, which was mostly like taking old school crime and mystery books and turning them into ebooks. And, it was a really, really fun job because it was super low key. I wasn't working 24/7. I had the chance to sort of like scale back a little bit, and I got to work with some cool authors and some cool books, but I also had the chance to pursue some of my own writing interests, which was great. And it was helpful to me to kind of like see some of like the background stuff on how the publishing industry worked. So it was a really good crash course. And it was funny. My first book, called New York, it actually got picked up by Exhibit A, an imprint of Angry Robot, which is like a UK publisher, but they were doing some stuff in the US. And then Angry Robot closed the imprint and canceled my contract. And that sucked because I went from like a 2-book deal to a no-book deal, like within the course of like 10 minutes. And then Jason Pinter from Polis came along and offered to put it out. And I ended up doing 5 more books with him, the Ash McKenna series, and then I did Takeout, the short story collection, all like food noir stories. And they were all really fulfilling projects, and I loved doing them, and I loved writing Ash. But they were small press books for a smaller audience, and they did pretty well considering the level they were being published at. And then The Warehouse thing just kind of went nuts. It was just weird. I'm still not entirely sure how I pulled that one off, because I thought like, hey, I'll write a book that's basically a giant fuck you to Amazon and their entire business model, and someone will definitely want to publish this. Somehow it happened. So essentially, I just worked really hard for a very long time, and I was very stubborn, and I didn't give up. And eventually I was able to become a full-time writer, and that's sort of the Cliff Notes version.
You know, I think that's wonderful. And one of the things that I always talk about to my students when I teach is, I say that there are a lot of different paths to success. And honestly, I use you as a frequent example, because I think it's actually a lot harder and a lot more stressful for somebody to get that big five, your warehouse deal. You've got a option with Ron Howard in all of these things. Like, if that happens fresh out of the gate, I think that there's a lot more pressure and a
Oh
lot
yeah,
more opportunity for failure.
there
Whereas
is.
what
Yeah.
you did, you worked with several small presses and you did, a series, and then you had, the quote unquote big idea in all caps, and went elsewhere. But I don't know that it would have been as successful had you not had that background and like kind of like put in your time, so to speak, before you got to that point. I think you
Y-
had a more realistic expectation, than a
Yeah.
lot of people would.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because on one hand, the background helped me and it didn't. Because I remember a conversation early on with my editor who picked up the warehouse. We were talking about promo stuff and he was explaining some like basic 101 stuff to me. And he's like, "Oh wait, God, I'm so sorry. I forgot you're not a debut." But like technically I kind of was, like I mean the Ash books did good business and I had like a bit of a readership, but this was like a whole new playing field.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, yeah, like there was stuff going on. Like I had never sold foreign rights before. I'd never like sold a film option before. So there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot going on that I had no idea how to process it. But I knew how to work with an editor. I knew how to receive edits and how to hit a deadline. I knew how sort of to communicate with my agent. I had expectations going in for what the marketing would look like. I knew which things I would have to do and which things I would have to have ready. And I already had like a little bit of a quote unquote platform of, me saying dumb shit on social media. So, it was helpful in that regard. Yeah. And I think that it could be really, really overwhelming if that's what you get out of the gate. Like that's just ridiculous. I don't know how anyone would be able to cope with that. But I think
Well,
there's
I
really
just see
something to
so
be
many
said for it.
people. Yeah, no, I see so many people who like, they get that dream deal out of the gate. And then honestly, it's like a one-hit wonder, like in music, because they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know how to market. They didn't know how to do the second book. They didn't know what was expected of them. And
Yeah.
I think having that background can really actually, really help you to succeed with, the dream deal.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was huge. And I think that if you look now at like some of like the really big names in crime fiction, like, Megan Abbott started out doing like smaller press books and now like, she's humongous. Ben Winters did that. Like the Last Policeman series was with
Mm-hmm.
Quirk Books, and now he's with Mulholland. Twain Swarzynski did that, where he was doing like kind of like quote unquote smaller books, and now like he's a bigger name. I see a lot of longevity in authors who sort of like start on a slightly smaller playing field and then kind of like build themselves up because the other thing and I think a lot of people aren't ready to accept this, and it's something that I had to come to terms with is every author coming out of the gate, they want like the big money
Of
crazy
course.
life-changing deal, right? um but my first novel was not that kind of book. It wasn't a big five book. It wasn't a blockbuster novel. It was like a small kind of like punk rock noir novel that had like a kind of like a limited audience. Like it was kind of a niche book. And we all kind of think that this is a meritocracy, that if we just work really hard, someone's going to say, here's $10 million. But it doesn't work like that. You also have to understand how to write for an audience and what the audience wants and expects and what the market looks like. And it's about figuring out how to write a book that is true to you, but also going to be appealing to a large readership. And just because you wrote a book doesn't mean people are going to read it.
Yeah, and I think that's a fault, if I can say that, within the publishing industry, because it used to be in the days of like Maxwell Perkins and, Blanche Knopf. It was not the book that they were acquiring that was the first book. They did not actually expect that to be, the massive hit. They expected the next book to be better and the next book to be better and to build a name. And
Yep.
unfortunately, a lot of the major publishing houses right now don't do that. If the first book is not the big hit, then you're basically like shuffled off to the side,
Yeah.
because it didn't work, and so nobody's going to put a lot of time or marketing or money behind book two if book one didn't work. And I think that's really a shame, and I think that's why actually these independent or smaller press models, going to a larger press publisher later on in your career is actually the way to go, like you did. Because you can see how you grow your audience, you can grow your craft until you get the breakout idea or the new and different thing.
Yeah, which is the other thing too. It's like, the warehouse, I had that idea. So, and I traced it back. New York came out in 2015, but I actually had the idea for the warehouse in 2012. And but I was not ready to write that book then. It's a big, complicated book that I had a lot to learn about my crafts before I can even pull it off. And I'm glad that so like I essentially had to write 5 books plus do a book with James Patterson before I could like even approach it. But like that's what I needed, because this was like, it was a big lift. And in the same way, I couldn't have done Paradox Hotel until I got the warehouse out of me. And it's like, it's good to sort of take like bigger and bigger swings in succession and just know like what you're ready for and what you're not ready for.
Well, absolutely. And I that's something that a lot of authors, just being an editor, authors tell me, like I had this idea or I have this idea, but I'm just not ready for it yet. And so that's actually a really great thing. You go, I've got this, it's on the back burner, it's percolating. Once I'm ready, I'll know. And
Yeah.
don't force yourself into that headspace.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you probably wanted to, because it's a great idea, the warehouse and also the Paradox Hotel. But like speaking of specifically the warehouse that you've had since you said 2012, I'm sure you wanted to write that even though it wasn't ready.
Oh yeah, I tried to start that thing like 4 or 5 times, and I bet if I went through my computer, I can find like some of the aborted attempts from the beginning where it was like sort of these weird ideas I had for opening it and starting it, and it used to be different characters and it used to be a slightly different premise, and it's just kind of like, but it was just sort of like this amorphous thing. It was like it had to kind of take shape over the years, and sort of so much of the time I spent on it was like just passive, just kind of like thinking it over until suddenly I'd have an idea and be like, oh, that's good. That was 3 months of work right there.
Well, but that's also a really good thing. I mean, it sounds, terribly time consuming, but at the same time, it's also cathartic knowing that, if you have that big idea, but you're not ready for it, you can kind of put it on the back burner, let it percolate until you know that you're in the place that you can write it. And I
Yeah.
think that's a lot of what being a writer is about, not necessarily like jumping at the quote unquote big idea, but realizing that you can do it once you're ready.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why like so I never have a deficit of ideas. Like whenever I think of an idea, like no matter how dumb it is, I create a Google Doc for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that because what like if it's an idea that I think actually has legs and might stand a chance, I create a Google Doc with like a memorable title, something I can remember. And then because I'll stumble across like an article or have a stray thought, and I'll just like pop it on
Mm-hmm.
my phone and drop it in there. And I've got one right now that's like really dumb, and I'm not going to tell you what it is on the
Oh,
podcast
yeah,
because
no,
it's
you're going
like,
to tell me later.
yeah, because like on the off chance this actually works one day.
Mm-hmm.
But like at the same time, I mean, I had a Google Doc that just said time travel hotel for like 2 years, and that was literally it. That's all I had. A Google Doc that said time travel hotel, and now it's a novel that's coming out next year. So
Yeah, no, and it's a brilliant novel, which I hope everybody pre-orders because I really, really like it. Um, it one thing that I haven't talked about with anybody else, I mean, you're only guest number three, but um, we haven't talked a lot about agents and finding them, getting them, keeping them, um, sending them by the wayside. I think agent journey is as important as the publisher journey. How, people market you, how you get in front of publishers, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, do you want to talk a little bit about your first agent versus now?
Yeah, I mean, I had such a weird experience because I didn't actually query to get either of my agents. I mean, I queried a lot and got rejected a lot. Um, but I was at a word stock in Portland years and years ago, and so I work for this website called Lit Reactor, and through Lit Reactor, I met this agent named Bree, and she was cool and she was around my age, and we got along, and she read one of my short stories. She's like, "Oh, this is awesome, like send me something, send me a book when you have a book done." And I sent her my first book and she really liked it, and she repped me on my first few. And it was good, like she was fun to work with, and she was a buddy, but like she decided, I think it was around the time that my fourth book came out, she decided she didn't want to be an agent anymore. And I was like, all right, cool, like time to go poke around and see what happens. But I also wasn't in a huge rush because I had my fourth book coming out from Polis. My fifth book, I knew I was closing the series with the fifth book, and I knew like the contract was kind of boilerplate at that point. Like I didn't need any kind of like rep on that.
Right.
It was just a matter of copying the old contract and signing it. Um, so out of the blue, I just get this message from Josh Getzler at HG Literary, and he's like, "Hey man, I've been out of the game for a bit. I'm getting back in. I'm building up my list. I heard you're free. Do you want to go out and get a beer? And before we go out, send me anything that you might have." And that just came solely on the fact that I had a couple of books under my belt, and
Mm-hmm.
and I knew nothing about this dude, and like I had been working in publishing for a few years, so I had like a fairly healthy radar for people, and so I was kind of surprised that his name didn't ring any bells. So I contacted a friend, like one of those like shadow people who just knows literally everyone and everything in publishing, and I asked her like, what's the deal with this dude Josh Getzler? She's like, ooh, yeah, sign with him. That's perfect. That is so like she was like, you and him, you're gonna do good things together. Like that's not even a question. And she's the kind of person who, if she tells me the sky is red, then the sky is red. So I met with him. I sent him the first like section of the warehouse, which was like 16,000 words, which is literally all I had at that point. And he's like, when is the rest going to be done? And I'm like, fuck if I know. I got to write it. But we had a great conversation. I explained to him like what the actual premise of the rest of the book was. The more I talked about it, the more excited he got. And I told him some of the bigger ideas that I had, and things that I wanted out of my career. And he's like, look, I really want to do this. I want to rep you. And a smarter person probably would have like taken at least a night to think about it, but I just shook his hand there. I'm like, fuck it, yeah, man, let's do it. I got a really good vibe off him, and I'm happy to say, I kind of went into it like when I was getting my second agent, I said to myself like, I don't want an agent who's a friend. Like, I just want an agent who's going to do the job for me, get it done, business relationship, strict. And now, like, me and Josh, like, we go out to dinner and drinks every now and again. Like, we text each other dumb shit. We're buddies. So it's actually like, it's kind of
Well,
nice.
I think that's an interesting conversation because, first of all, I hate to say this, but I think that so many people have a quote unquote starter agent, if that makes any sense, where, it's the person you sign with first who might get something in front of a smaller publisher. And then once you kind of break out or have the big idea, like you did, um, you get somebody who can market that to a big five or to a larger audience. And I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation. And I think that so many people, I mean, it's great if you can stay. I know people who have been with their agent for 20 years. But at the same time, I think that there are just like kind of relationships, you have relationships with your agents that are right for that time in your life. And then once you move on, you need to move forward and get a different agent.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, I literally, that's exactly what I had. I had a really good starter agent. You know, she was super enthusiastic. She worked really hard, but like Josh had real substantive connections with like big five editors. Like a lot of agents wouldn't have been able to make happen what he did. So yeah, it just it was kind of like a I don't want to call it a happy coincidence because you know I did really like working with Brie, but like when she decided that she didn't want to be an agent anymore, it was like, all right, like the timing here actually kind of works for me because like I'm ready to move to the next step in my career, and you know now I can find an agent who I really believe is gonna do that for me.
Well, and I'd like to talk to about that just a little bit more because, full disclosure for our listeners, I actually have the same agent,
Yep.
and he was also not my first agent. Kind of similar but different story where I had a prior agent who was, working at a larger agency, and then she, fortunately for her, got poached by somebody on the West Coast who, wanted her to start a literary arm of a film agency, and there was a non-compete. So I basically lost my agent less than a year in, and had to look elsewhere. And I actually had the opportunity to go with the head of that particular agency, and it was not a personality fit for me. And I
Yep.
think that that's something that a lot of people, especially if they're new to the game, they don't think about. I talk a lot about building your team because, writing is a very solitary pursuit, of course. But once you have an agent, an editor, a publisher, these are all people that you have to get along with and work with, hopefully long term, um, in different ways. And you want really passionate advocates. And I just did not connect with the person who was the head of this agency. And I knew it was not the right fit for my books. So I said no. And I talked to a lot of friends in the industry, and several who were repped by Josh Gatzler. And I got feedback like, he's great, obviously, but also things like, he's always looking out for an opportunity for me. He's thinking of expanding my brand. He's looking at things that I haven't even written yet and going, this would be great for you. And I really liked that out of the box thinking, which was why I ended up approaching him,
Yeah.
when I turned down the other agencies. So I think, building, having your agent as somebody that you can speak to and be honest with and be part of your team and your representative. I know so many people who are intimidated by their agents, don't necessarily want to be honest with them, don't want to follow up because they feel like it's pressuring them. And I feel like it should be flowing the other way.
So okay, so this is a really good discussion point because like there's something that's really important to be said here for agents and for editors and publishers too. You know, I have a buddy who reached out to me recently who was like, "Hey man, you know, I just wanted to take your temperature on this. You know, my editor hasn't like he owes me edits and like he hasn't gotten them to me yet, and we're getting close to when the book is coming out." And you know I or like we have to have galleys out and I don't know what's going on. I'm like, why are you asking me this? To ask him, it's his responsibility to answer that, you know,
Right.
like. And I think that authors tend to and yeah, like, you know, when you struggle in the coal mines your whole life, like when you finally come out of it, I guess like you have a little bit of a, I don't know, a little PTSD. But
Of
you know,
course.
your agent, your editor, like it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And if you have a question, you don't have to sit there and be afraid to ask it. You ask it. You know, like so, and you know what? I love Josh. I love Josh to death. But like, dude's got a lot of clients. Dude's got a lot on his plate. You know, sometimes I send him an email or a text. He might not see it. It might slip by because he's working on 20 other things. It's a no hard feelings kind of thing. I'll send him the email the next day. If he doesn't get it, I'll send it again 2 days later. And then finally he'll be like,
Hmm.
oh man, hey, sorry, I missed this. Like you gotta be willing to be a squeaky wheel, and you gotta understand that like he's not pissed that I'm bothering him. He's probably like, oh, cool. I was really busy. This is a helpful reminder, you know?
Exactly.
Like but people treat these relationships like they're these precious things that are going to crumble if you don't handle them correctly. And it's like, man, like, your agent kind of, I don't want to say they work for you, but like, because it's sort of like a weird, it's a back and forth kind of thing, but they ain't getting paid until you get paid. And like,
I say this all the time. I'm like, we don't eat. Like literally, if we don't have writers as agents, as editors, as whatever, like we can't feed ourselves. This is we are dining out on you,
yeah.
so to speak. So I it just really, it drives me nuts when it's that I'm really scared, I don't want to bother them mentality, when in fact, our livelihood results in how well we're performing for putting your book out there, whether it's an publisher, editor, or agent.
And here's the thing, like if you have an agent who like isn't answering your questions and then you keep on asking and they say, I'm really annoyed at you for asking me this, then you have a really bad agent. You need to fire that agent and find one who is a professional.
Exactly. And that's kind of one of the other things, because I notice this so often, like, so many people, debut authors particularly, are like, I'm just dying for an agent. I can't get an agent. And whether or not that's, representation or access or whatever it is. But so often it's not, they will take the first person who offers them a deal, who
Yep.
acts slightly interested. And I'm like, if you don't have the person who has stayed up all night reading your book and is a passionate advocate for you, it's not the right person. Like it's the building your team kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And some agents are bad. Like they're just not
Yes.
good. Like there's a couple of agents where like again, because like I've got a little background in publishing, so like I know more agents probably than the average author does, and sort of like the kind of work that they do. And there's a few agents that people will reach out to me and be like, hey, this person contacted me. I'd be like, oh man, like I heard this from one of their clients, or like my interaction with them when I was working in publishing was really negative. Maybe you should think again about that. And it always drives me nuts too, because sometimes I give like really sort of like even-handed, careful warnings, and they're like, okay, but should I send stuff anyway? I'm like, you can, but and you can also never ask me for advice again. Like what are you doing? Like I'm telling you from personal experience that this
Yeah.
person isn't very good at their job. Like if you want to ignore me, you can ignore me. That's fine, but don't come back.
Well, and the thing is, and not to knock agents, because actually I'm an advocate for agents. I think that if you can get the right agent for you, it can absolutely open doors. It can get you places on desks and in front of eyes that you may never have been able to do otherwise, if you're lucky. Um, that being said, there's no test, there's no licensing. I have a I went to law school and I passed the bar. And, there's continuing legal education that even if I don't practice, I have to do to keep my license. Um, these are not things that exist with agents. You can basically just be like, hello, I am in, my parents' basement and I am now an agent. No offense to people who do that. They could be very talented. But often it's not the case. And so sometimes having the wrong agent can push you back and delay your success a lot more than if you didn't have one at all.
Yeah,
And
yeah. A bad agent is worse than no agent,
right.
because like say you've got like a bad agent and you've got a book proposal that's not good, or a book that's not ready to be queried, and like they send it out to all these editors and all the editors pass on it. Like if there was a deficiency with anything, like you're basically like you can't resubmit that book. Like Like you can
Right.
fix whatever the problem was, but then all the editors who passed on it are going to be like, I already saw this. Like I've got 800 more books sitting in the queue today. Like I don't need to look at this again, and that's not a good place to be.
No, absolutely. And I think having, and this is mostly for, listeners who are on their first agent, but I think having a level of accountability, I think that you need to ask your agent, like, can I see, whatever query you're sending out? Or, let's discuss who you're sending it out to in the first round. Those are reasonable things to ask. And I see so many things that doesn't happen with, that end up, you know, not being successful as a result.
Yeah, yeah. If you've got an agent who doesn't want you talking to their other clients or doesn't want to like discuss strategy with you or doesn't want to tell you who they're submitting to, like you have a bad agent.
Yeah. And it's okay to say no or to leave that agent. And I think that
Yeah.
that's something, everybody's like, oh, I have an agent, and that has such a level of prestige with it, but it doesn't actually necessarily translate.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, good. Um, okay, what's next? How about the fact that you have tattoos for all of your books? That's a fun.
I mean, it's technical. It's technical that I do because I only got really one for like the Ash books, and there were five of those, and I don't really have technically a takeout tattoo, but I've
Okay,
got a
well,
warehouse
take out,
tattoo,
I
and
don't know. You could just get, like, I don't know, random chopsticks or something.
yeah,
Um,
you see, now that you've said it though, now I feel like I should. Well, here's a result of like being and coming out of a pandemic is now I want like 100 tattoos.
well, I think we all kind of do. Like that was
Yeah.
that was one of my first like bucket list post pandemic.
Yeah, that's something I definitely like. I got to get in touch with my artist and see what her deal is, like scheduling wise, because like now I know we're both vaccinated and it's like all bets are off now. Because I want to get a Paradox one, but I want to get like a whole bunch of other stuff. And yeah, no, it's
Well, I
like
know you did the umbrella for the Ash books, right?
yeah,
Yeah. And you did one for Warehouse. You did the
yeah,
flower.
yeah, yeah. So with Paradox, I haven't I have a few ideas, but I don't want to talk about them just yet because like I got to actually get them. Um, but yeah, no, like I'm at the point of like we're just like coming out of the pandemic. I feel like we're in the age of like not giving fucks anymore. Like I'm just gonna get like a face tattoo or something. Like I just don't care anymore.
Okay, just don't do like a spider web.
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
It'll be a classy one no matter what.
Yeah, classy face tattoo. I don't know that that's a thing, but
It can
I
be a
I
thing.
I trust that it
Yeah.
can be.
Yeah.
No, but I'm just I know several authors who do this. And I guess my only question about it, I think it's a great idea, but I know so many authors who go back and reread their earlier work and are like, oh my God, this was so, I could fix this. I can do better. I can't believe I was that naive when I wrote that book. So when you immortalize that with a tattoo, do you ever go back to that tattoo and go, oh, I'm not thrilled with?
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely tattoos I have that like I look at and I'm like, wow, like I wish that were different. But it's also like it's an artifact of a different time. It's an artifact of me at that time. Just like the books I wrote at that time were artifacts, like
Mhm.
I sort of I'm not really interested in changing them. I'm just happy that they exist in the form that they do. I forget. Well, I think I wanted to see what the epigraph was in my second book recently, and so I picked it up and I looked at the epigraph, and then I just started flipping through the book, and I was like, man, like I can't believe I wrote this. And there's stuff in there that I straight up don't remember, or like it's like ringing bell because like it's so long ago, and it's yeah, there's a lot that I would probably do differently, but also looking at it, there's a lot there that I was like, oh, like okay, I wasn't terrible at this, even though I was like still a baby writer, and I've accepted a long time ago that I hope the first book I ever wrote is also the worst thing that I ever write, because like I
As
want
it
to get
should be.
better. Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to get better with each subsequent book. I feel like I have. Like I always kind of set myself a goal for each book. Like I kind of try to focus on like what the weak points were, and I try to improve that in the following book. And there were things that in the warehouse I feel like I could have done better, that I tried to do a better job of in the Paradox Hotel. And in Paradox Hotel, there are things that I see now, like as I'm kind of like putting a bow on this, that it's like I want to carry into the next one. So
Hmm.
yeah, no, it's kind of fun to just like consider them like, museum objects. They just kind of like they're there, and people might rediscover them and people might have an experience with them, and that's cool. But like my time with them is done. Like they're just meant to like sit there and
Well,
for me to
I
admire.
think that happens a lot. And I mean, maybe you and I just have some serious mental issues, but I certainly haven't written as many books as you, but like I'll go back and read a short story that I published and I'm like, I don't remember basically any of this. And so I have no idea if it's like a fugue state that writers go into.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I think it's part fugue state, but it's also part like, it's this huge dump of like brain power that you have to put into a story.
mhm.
And it's like, and I was having this conversation with someone recently about how like by the time I'm going to be out promoting Paradox Hotel, I'm already going to be working on my next book, which I already have like a rough sense of what it's going to be, which means by the time I'm out promoting it, my head's going to be in that realm, which means
Right.
people are going to be asking me stuff about Paradox, and I'm going to be struggling to remember. And God forbid anyone asks me a question about Warehouse. Like, I'm not going to know what to do. Um, Someone actually recently on Twitter, like they read my first book and they asked me a question about it, and I had literally no idea what the question was even in reference to. I stared at it for a good couple of minutes and I was like, I got nothing on this. I don't know how to answer this from the goddamn book that I wrote, you
Yep.
know? But it's like it's kind of remarkable the way your brain, and I think part of it is because you sort of like you live inside this sandbox for so long, and you get to know it so intimately that but like almost too intimately, so that by the time you move on to the next sandbox, it's like your brain just got so like overloaded on the last one that you just have to kind of like wipe the mechanism and start fresh.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. But kind of speaking of that sandbox and going into a slightly more, I mean, not that we weren't having fun before, but more of a fun question. Um, so knowing all of this backstory, et cetera, for your own books or not, um, what sandbox would you like to play in, given everything that you know and have done? Like for, and it doesn't matter if it's a TV, graphic novel, another author's universe. What would you love to write for?
Oh, I want to write Superman. Like and look, like I want to do a little bit of everything. Like I want to write some TV. Like I'm working on a comic book with a buddy right now. Like I got a lot of things that are like different that are in the hopper, but like my dream is to one day write Superman. And I have a dream Superman pitch that I actually think is like pretty solid, and I don't think has been done before.
Okay.
And I mean, I grew up reading Superman, so I feel like, I could have very well missed, because like, I mean, the character's been around since 1938.
Hmm.
So I'm sure I could have missed it at some point, but like, I know the character pretty well. And like, I feel like this would be a fun story to tell. And I just like, yeah, God, that would be great. But that's also like, it's like asking for the keys to the Ferrari when like you've only just got your learner's permit. Like you got to kind of work up to that one.
Well, I don't know. I think that that's, a possibility. Anything else that, I mean, second choice in case anybody's listening and like,
I mean, I really want to do Star Wars, and I technically did, because I did a short story set in the Star Wars universe for one of
mhm.
the Del Rey anthologies, and that was super cool because there's like, man, like I think that's the most research I've ever done on anything I've ever written, and it was a 4,000 word story, but it was like, oh man, like you got to get that stuff right. Which I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
and
no question. Like that is those. I first of all, you grew up in crime fiction, which is, I think, the genre that has the most, people will come back at you if you don't have a street right or a name right or a type of gun right, or
Yep.
these are the people who do crossword puzzles every day that we can't possibly ever hope to solve, and
Yeah.
they know all of these facts. And so then, going from that into a Star Wars universe, which is like, this is the Bible to a lot of people. So,
Yeah, I actually, and I took a good deal of pride in this when because after you finish, so you work with an editor at Del Rey. Del Rey at Penguin Random House is the imprint that handles all the Star Wars stuff. And I worked with this incredible editor, Liz Schaefer, who, like, she really knew her stuff, and like, you know, really, like, it was a great working experience. And but then after she kind of like gives you the thumbs up on the story, they send it over to Lucasfilm because like their people have to read it to make
mhm.
sure that it's okay. And it's like, oh man, like that was the scary part. I was like, they're gonna look at this and be like, no, no, infidel, get out of our house. Um, and I say with a great deal of pride, I think they only corrected like one thing in the story, one thing that I sort of like, I think I termed wrong, and I don't even remember exactly what it is, but it was like a minor technical detail. Um, but yeah, it was like it was hard because like I was setting a story set on Cloud City, and it was like there's really only like, it appears for like a very short time in Empire, and like there's a whole bunch of extended stuff about Cloud City, but like they kind of like did away with the extended universe. So like you're kind of go like there's a lot of information out there, and you're trying to figure out what's relevant and what's not, and like how to kind of make it all work. And yeah. Oh, it was fun. I would love to write a full Star Wars novel. And like
Mhm.
every now and again, because I know like some of the editors like from Del Rey follow me on Twitter, and like I'm friendly with them. Like we hang out at conferences and stuff. So like every now and again, I'll just start tweeting out like dumb Star Wars pitch ideas, which is like I really want to do like a Star Wars novel, but like in the vein of like Roadhouse, where it's like a like a little like call a cantina essentially, that's set at like
Mhm.
a bar on like the edge of the universe, and like crazy shit goes down. And yeah, I want to do a Roadhouse Star Wars novel essentially.
Yeah, so I guess two questions following that. The first one being like, do you think it's easier or harder to play in somebody else's sandbox? Like, for Star Wars, you have to do all of that research, and it's not your backstory. It's figuring something else out. Like, is this easier or harder as a writer?
That, and that's a really interesting question, because on one hand, I'm I'm probably way more precious about the worlds that I create because they're mine. Like I gave
Mhm.
birth to them. I'm the one who put them together. Whereas like with Star Wars, I'm just getting invited to like play with like the coolest set of toys ever. And then I just have to kind of put them back neatly when I'm done.
Mhm.
Um, but I also like I don't want to make it seem like I'm not putting like my heart and my soul in the Star Wars short that I wrote. Like I really worked that over, and I wanted it to be a good story, and I wanted to put myself into it, and I wanted to sort of like write something that spoke to what was interesting to me about the character and about like, sort of a cool access point into the Star Wars universe. So, in some ways it's a little bit easier, like because they're not my toys, they're someone else's. Like I don't have to carry them around with me every day.
Right.
But there is a little bit of pressure to like, put them back the way you found them, and not like, light them on fire or drop them down a well or
I,
something.
I, I think that's a great analogy. And my second question was going to be just, how did you like The Mandalorian?
Oh, I love it. I think it's like probably my favorite Star Wars property.
Right, me too.
Because it's so like it's exactly what I want out of Star Wars. It's basically like cool space western with like a weird little funny alien baby. Like that's great. Um, but what's amazing to me is the way that like the baby Yoda character is just like engineered to be so insanely adorable.
Right.
Like my daughter is 6, and she's not old enough to watch The Mandalorian. Like she hasn't watched any Star Wars stuff yet. And I just like, but we were in a store together, and like they had a baby Yoda plush behind the counter, and she just looks up and she goes, "What is that?" Like she was just so like taken by it, and it was like, yeah, like this thing is designed
Yeah,
to
no,
like
it's
to
it's
just
it's
like,
completely adorable.
yeah, no, it's just weird but cool. But yeah, no, such a fun show, really really dig it. And very much looking forward to more of it, because it's like, yeah, it's so cool. Like it's scaled back, it's stripped down, it's like, and just it's just cool. It's cool.
Yeah, I don't
Like
disagree with you because as you know, have a lot of friends who write for Star Wars or worked with early Star Wars properties, and it just, I enjoyed it always, but Mandalorian just took it to the next level in some way, and I think you're right. It's more like it's a space western that was what I didn't know I needed.
Well, and that's the fun thing about space stories is like you can transpose so many cool genres onto space. Like space western is a great genre for space because you're dealing with like remote places with sort of like cobbled together systems of law. Horror works so well in space because space is in general just horrifying because everything about it can kill you. Um, and you can't go outside and you can't kind of get away from things. And it's just like, it's it's funny. The next I'm working on two projects right now, and one is sort of like space adjacent, but one is very much set in space. And it's like I'm co-writing it with a friend. It's like an idea for a series of novels, and I'm actually probably when we get off this conversation, I'm probably going to work on it for a little bit. But yeah, no, it's like I want to do like some stuff set in space next. Like that'd be a lot of fun.
No, I think that's really awesome. So the other question that I always, well, always, again, you're number three in this podcast, but still always, um, is there somebody that you ever write for? Like I tend to, when I write, particularly with screenplays, but not necessarily, I have particular actors or actresses in mind that I write to. Is there somebody that you would love to write for?
Like that I would love to write something for, or because there is someone I always kind of write to.
Okay, I think that's the answer.
Yeah, I write I write to my mom. And
Oh, oh my
well,
God, Rob! Like we just all melted. Like
okay,
that's
it's
not.
see, actually it's a little less sweet than it sounds. The reason I write to my mom is because my mom represents to me the average consumer, right? The average consumer of media and entertainment, where,
Wow, you just ruined that.
just stick with me for a second, and I think
I
this
will.
actually
I
might be a good
promise.
one. Jesus Christ. All right. So you and I, like how many books would you say you read in a year?
Oh my God, I have no idea.
Yeah, like
100.
yeah. We are not the average reader. We're not.
No,
We read a lot of books. We read in a genre that we like. We sometimes read outside genres that we like. We read big press books, we read small press books. We are actively on the hunt for new books. And also
agreed.
as artists, we are often on the hunt for like, cool movies that not everyone has heard of, cool music that not everyone has heard of.
Hmm.
And that is not how the average consumer consumes anything. They hear about a book because Oprah told them about it, or but because their friend told them about it, or because they saw something in Entertainment Weekly, or they saw something on Good Morning America. And you know I feel like that's kind of that it's a good place to be in terms of thinking about what's going to be appealing to that person, what's going to get that person off the couch to make you like the one of the two or three books that they're going to read in a year.
Right.
And because I think, and this happens specifically, very specifically in crime fiction, where like I see a lot of guys out there writing like pastiches of like Cornell Woolrich and like Dashiell Hammett and Paul Kane and whoever, and it's like, man, like no one reads those books anymore. That's not the kind of thing people read. Like and I'm not saying you got to dumb your stuff down or write to a trend or you got to like, but it's being able to like write a story that's appealing to you and fulfills you as a writer, but
Right.
like is also appealing to a reader and to an audience. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I like my mom, she reads my stuff. Like she's an avid reader of my books, but like, she reads like Stephen King. She watches Marvel movies. Like she consumes like really sort of the popular stuff that everyone is talking about, and that's not a bad thing because like that stuff is really fun. I'll sit here all day and talk about how much I love the Marvel movies, but it's like I think it's good
We
to
can
sort of,
talk about that. We'll
yeah.
disagree, but we can talk about
Uh-huh.
it.
But again, like this is like going back to like my publishing days when it's like we were putting out like an edition of like Fast One by Paul Kane, which I guess is like pretty well regarded as like a sort of like classic of the crime fiction genre, and it wasn't selling very well. And my boss was like, I don't understand why people aren't gobbling this up, and I'm like, because no one knows who the fuck Paul Kane is. Like we do.
Hmm.
We do. Like we're like our little tiny, 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 tiny circle of crime fiction, of classic crime fiction consumers knows who this is. A wider audience does not. And a wider audience probably isn't going to be into Fast One by Paul Kane. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, and that's something that, especially writing in genre, really drags us down is we forget that what we do is kind of niche. Like if you like I think sci-fi tends to be a little bit more appealing to an average readership, but like what was the last like humongous ass crime fiction book that like just really took the world by storm?
Gone Girl.
Yep. And when did Gone Girl come out?
20, I'm gonna say 15, but I'm probably wrong.
And what did Gone Girl inspire? It inspired an entire genre of books with like just girl
Girl
in the
in the
title for
title. Yeah.
literally no reason whatsoever. We tend to forget that like what we do is not what the average consumer does. So I think it's like, and that's why it's valuable for me to sometimes like consider things from my mom's perspective, because she's a savvy consumer, she's a smart lady, but like she's the person I'm trying to get the attention of, the person who reads like a handful of books a year.
Well, did she actually influence your writing in the sense that this was what the type of thing? Did she read crime fiction? Did she read speculative fiction? Like, did
No, not
this?
really. um it was more just like being able to like appeal to a broader audience in the sense of like writing accessible characters, writing like so with Warehouse, like I really wanted to kind of I spent like a year just like deconstructing like mainstream thrillers, trying to figure out the mechanics of how they were put
Mhm.
together. And that was like hugely informative and helpful for me. And I think it's like you're trying to, because look, like the Warehouse is a heavy book. It's a polemic. It's about the end run of capitalism and why it's evil, and that's a hard book to put in front of people and be like, here, consume this thing that's basically like like a very long study hall lecture. And so the key is like making it exciting and making it fun and making it kind of dark and funny and like putting these characters in it that you can identify with and like having the story move so that it's like you kind of keep on coming back to it. And that's kind of what I was aiming for, is like that sort of a less mainstream story with kind of like a mainstream presentation.
No, that makes perfect sense. Um, Actually, one of the weird mental associations that I'm making is when I was in high school, my mom volunteered at the high school library, and it was when Jurassic Park came out as a book. And she was like, "This is, way too violent. You can't read this." And I remember the cover, and I remember like dying and waiting to read that book. And I think it colored a lot of what I do in books, like in books, edit in books. Um, there were a lot of things wrong with it, obviously. Um, but it still was one of the things where I was like, this is something that was formative to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my formative book was Fahrenheit 451,
Well,
which is
aren't we
funny that
fancy?
Yeah, which is funny because I then got into crime fiction. But I mean, I don't know, everything's crime fiction. Everyone's doing something wrong in
Of
every
course.
book. Great Gatsby's crime fiction, you
Yeah,
know.
I know. Dickens, like we won't start here.
Yeah, yeah,
Just move on.
yep.
Yeah, no, I think all of these things are interestingly formative. And so is there a book that you would credit to what you've done?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Fahrenheit. Like that would be a big one. I feel like there were a couple of formative books for me. Like Fahrenheit really kind of like that was the first book that ever kind of like bowled me over, and like I still revisit from time to time. I remember like every angsty mid-30s guy, like I got really into Chuck Palahniuk at one point, and learned a lot
Mhm.
from him, and that led me to like Tom Spanbauer, who I think is like probably the greatest writer who ever lived. Um, and I actually dedicated Paradox Hotel to him because like he was pretty influential in my writing journey, and like I got to work with him for a weekend a few years ago, and that was really really great. And but also like Amy Hempel, who is like probably the best living short story writer ever, who like it's funny, like I really love genre, but there are a couple of like I guess quote unquote literary writers who like I really look to for inspiration and kind of like encourage me to like really think about craft and really try to
Mhm.
step it up.
That's great. Well, I guess we are basically well past the top of the hour. So can you give me any of your social media accounts and whatever is coming up next for you? Let's plug it.
Sure. My website is robwhart.com. I'm Rob W. Hart on Twitter. I'm Rob W. Hart1 on Instagram. Um, and yeah, so next is Paradox Hotel. That's going to be out in February. And it's about hotel for time travelers, and it's got robots and dinosaurs. But it's also about like, eternalism and Buddhism and
Yeah, but
how the
there's
hardest thing we have to
dinosaurs. So
face is
let's just
ourselves. And
focus on that.
yeah, the dinosaurs. So okay, so quick story, and I'm real proud of this. So I work with my editor Julian Pavia. He does like The Martian and like Blake Crouch's books and Max Brooks's books. Like he is an incredible editor, and he really like he drills down and really pushes me, and I love it. And the last round of edits on Paradox Hotel, it's split up into like 13 sections, and there's one dinosaur section that he had like no notes on, like nothing. And like he takes like really detailed notes, and I'm
He
reading through the
really
section,
does. I
and
know Julian's notes. Yes.
yeah, and I'm reading through it. I'm like, oh man, like I really nailed it with the dinosaurs. And it was funny too because like and I was talking to Josh about this, like because I was talking to his class at NYU, and we were telling the story about how when I initially pitched Paradox Hotel to him, he was like, "Please God, do not write that book." Um, and in
But it's a
part it was
great
because
book.
yeah, I did a really bad job pitching it, and because he was like, "You're going too hard sci-fi. Like this is not a mass appeal book. Like this is not a mainstream commercial thriller. This is just like." You're getting into nerd territory here. Like this is not like he uses his mom as an example. He's like, this is not like my mom loved the warehouse. She's not going to read this book. And I'm like, yeah, no, but yeah, it's okay. It's going to be fine. And I just did a bad job of it. So like, I finally like stamped my feet and cried and told him I was going to do it. And then I was like, but also there's a robot and also there are dinosaurs. And he's like, why are you doing this to me? And I remember after he read the book, he was like, I gotta give you credit. You pulled off the dinosaurs. I'm like, I know.
No, I remember the dinosaurs too.
Yeah.
No,
Oh man,
it's
it
wonderful.
makes me real happy. So I'm real happy to have written something with dinosaurs in it. And like,
I'm very happy that you wrote this too. It was wonderful, and I hope everybody who listens, picks up a copy, whether pre-order or not, depending on when this airs.
has been Words of Prey, and it is a Pipeline Artists original. And Pipeline Artists focuses on education, empowerment, and elevating authentic voices in film publishing and beyond. And you can contact us and the other future podcasts at podcasts, plural, at pipelineartist.com. And you can find us and a bunch of other amazing podcasts at pipelineartist.com/listen. And if you have any suggestions for guests or anything else, or any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will see you next time.